We finally managed to find a new carer. Heidi from Lichtenberg. Hope she'd be better than the last one. She was neither use nor ornament. Ralph said we can't afford to be fussy because it's difficult to find a carer at any price these days. But I'll not have any old Tom, Dick or Harry. This Heidi came with glowing references from Mount View. That's what I'll end up when Ralph gets fed up with me. It's the only care home left in Stoke-on-Trent, seeing as very few old people survived the pandemic. She had to leave on account of these new rules. Basically, they weren't able to prove her job couldn't be done by a Brit, which is ridiculous because I've heard they're very short staff at Mount View. I wanted to know what she was still doing here. I thought they had to go home if they didn't have a work permit. And I thought we weren't allowed to employ a foreigner. I don't know why I can't find a nice English girl. Like that Moira. Ralph pointed out she was actually Scottish, which makes her a foreigner now. Thanks to me, he says. Don't know why I should take the blame for everything. Ralph said he's got to blame someone, and I'm to hand. Show his mother a little respect. Anyway, this Heidi's a pretty girl, and she's single. I told her Ralph's single as well, and he's got a good job and a full head of hair. Well, I'm only looking out for him. She was couch surfing, whatever that means. A landlord threw her out when she lost her job. Apparently she'd have to go or he'd be prosecuted. Mind you, Mrs. Hargreaves rents a room to a foreigner and she's not been persecuted. Ralph said Mr. Abdullah isn't a foreigner. Well, it looks like a foreigner to me. Apparently there's nothing for her in Lichtenberg, so she wants to stay here if she can. Despite recent events, she loves everything about England, apart from the food. I said, what's wrong with the food? You can't beat English food for a good, solid, substantial meal. We told her we couldn't employ her officially because it's difficult to prove there aren't any English people who can do the job, even though there aren't. She'd rather work officially, but no one would take her on. Too much red tape. Ralph knows all about that. He works for an engineering company. He says there's hardly any British people with the skills they need, and it's virtually impossible to employ a foreigner. They've had to cut production in half. They make braking systems for cars. Mind you, they're not sending anything like as many as before, what with the tariffs. Ralph's firm used to supply all those posh German companies, Mercedes, BMW and the like. Now it's just British manufacturers. Well, one British manufacturer. They're hoping to get the contract for the new Morris Minor. Ralph's put his name down for one, but long waiting list. His dad's Morris Minor's forever breaking down. Replaced it with a Volkswagen Beetle, which was much more reliable. Mind you, not many people can afford a German car nowadays. Anyway, Ralph offered £9 an hour, cash in hand, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, basically when he's at work. And there's free accommodation, comfortable room of her own with a nice view of the park across the road. Well, there is if you lean out the window.
Speaking in the House of Commons today, the Prime Minister, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said a £7 billion overspend on New Hadrian's Wall was the result of the original Roman foundations proving inadequate to support the new structure, which is 19 feet tall and made of reinforced concrete. New Hadrian's Wall will be more than 85 miles long, but it will be dwarfed by the 200-mile wall planned for the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. The government's claim that the Irish Republic will pay for this wall has again been questioned by the opposition leader, Philip Hammond.
He's never had much luck with the opposite sex, hasn't Ralph? I think he sets his sights too high. He won't have anything to do with the local girls. He says they're common, and he's not far wrong. He likes nice middle-class girls with an education and something to say for themselves. There aren't many of those round here. If he does meet a nice middle-class girl, never seems to go anywhere. When he tells them what he does for a living, their eyes glaze over, or so he says. According to Ralph, they're all looking for lawyers and stockbrokers and such like. Not someone who uses a spanner for a living. He says English women are very class-conscious and materialistic. It's a bit insulting if you ask me. They fall into 4 categories according to Ralph. You've got what he calls steerage. They're the women round here, the common ones. Then you've got the Sloane Ranger types, very materialistic. Then you've got the hard-nosed career women, very driven and cold as ice, or so he says. And then you've got the blue stockings. They're the only ones he really likes. Of course, they don't actually wear blue stockings, but not all the time. You know, lefty intellectual women, very long hair and loose clothing. Usually teachers and charity workers. Mind you, they're mostly vegetarian. I tell him, he doesn't want a woman with an eating disorder. Anyway, he never went to university, so he doesn't get to look in with them. Ralph thought he might try to find a foreign woman, but they're difficult to find these days. Of course, he's just making excuses for himself. That's not the real reason why he's never had a proper girlfriend. He's never had a lot of confidence with the opposite sex. And now he's well past his prime with next to no experience. You know, when it comes to, well, I'm sure you can imagine. He does this interweb dating and speedo dating. I thought that might be dating in swimwear, but he said it's nothing of the sort. He said it's for youngsters anyway. Not for men of his age. I suggested he try carbon dating. He didn't like that.
The Foreign Office has confirmed that the Spanish Prime Minister is about to tear up the Anglo-Spanish Gibraltar Agreement, and that unfortunately this will pave the way for the Scottish Republic to join the European Union. The government had hoped that in return for Britain giving up its claim to Gibraltar, Spain would veto Scottish accession to the EU. Speaking in Madrid, the Foreign Secretary, Sir Nigel Farage, said that he should have known better than to trust a greasy dago. The Spanish volte-face is seen as another example of Britain's increasing isolation.
I'll tell you one thing. This Heidi certainly knows her way around the kitchen. Most of my carers have been next to useless in that department. Mind you, last one was a dab hand with a microwave. Heidi served up some sausages for lunch. Bratwurst, she called them. Didn't think you could get foreign food anymore. Bratwurst. Apparently, worst means sausage. I said, that's one way of dealing with naughty children. She's got an infectious laugh as I do. She said, where would we be without our sense of humour? I suggested Germany. Not that I dislike the Germans. Never had much to do with them. Usually get a lot of Poles round here and they don't like the Germans one little bit. Well, in the same club now. Unlike us. Nah, probably for the best. Britain's going to be great again. Just a shame Boris had to step down after all he did for us. I mean, I know he made a pig's ear of the pandemic, but he asked me, it wasn't entirely his fault. At least he's only had to move next door to number 11. Mind you, seems to be making a pig's ear of that as well. Ralph said it's no wonder the government don't want to talk about the pandemic. He says that's why they shut down the BBC on account of them pushing for inquiry. That's off the cards now anyway. Never any mention of it on the news. 500,000 dead, and you think it had never happened. Well, it's probably better to put it all behind us. What's the use of blame and reincarnation anyway? Ralph said we got the government we deserved. He called them a useless bunch of populist spibs and shysters. He's only saying that to get at me. He used to be quite patriotic. Now all he does is criticise his own country. He says, how could he be patriotic when over half the country are the racists or fools? Which is very nice. Heidi says nowadays Europeans think of the English as small-minded and insular. Well, that's as maybe, I said, but there were simply too many foreigners. I just couldn't get on with them. Heidi says, she's a foreigner and we get on very well. I said, I don't mean you. As I say, they're mostly Poles round here. According to Heidi, if I got to know the Polish people, I might have got on with them as well. Don't know about that. She says she's got more in common with most English people than she has her own countrymen. She says sharing a nationality doesn't mean you get on with someone. Well, too late now anyway. Most of them Poles have gone home. I've said you can't get a decent builder now unless you pay through the nose. Anyway, this is only a small island. We can't have every Tom, Dick and Harry coming here. There's just too many people. Not enough housing for a start, especially now you can't get the builders. And what about the waiting list? I waited months for my hip. Mind you, now most of the European nurses have gone home. The waiting times are even longer. The NHS was bad enough before. It's in chaos now. Heidi said she really loved working at Mount View. Apparently she had a lot of friends there. Now she said her life's been turned upside down and she doesn't know what the future holds. And she burst into tears and ran into the kitchen. Didn't know where to look.
The Independent Office for Fiscal Affairs has confirmed that the UK economy has shrunk by between 15 and 20% every year since Britain left the European Union. Britain has slipped from being the world's fifth largest economy to the 28th, largely because of a sharp reduction in exports to the EU and further loss of tax revenues after the exodus of financial sector jobs to Frankfurt. For the fifth year running, the government has been forced to cut welfare budgets, and NHS spending is down to half what it was in 2018 in real terms. After the IMF's decision yesterday to reject Britain's application for an emergency loan, the pound has dropped to its lowest level against major foreign currencies since 1348. There's been no reaction so far from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Boris Johnson.
Maureen came round last week. Herb and Gerald had just come back from a fortnight in Alicante. She said it was long enough to be away on account of all that foreign food. I know what she means. Me and Ralph went to Benidorm last year and didn't get on at all well with the local cuisine. I can't be doing with that paella. Throw all sorts of stuff in. Bones and shells and claws and what have you. Don't know what they do with the edible bits. We had most of our meals in the English pub. They did a very serviceable steak and kidney pie. Mind you, not the same as you get here. Suppose they can't get the ingredients. Even their fish and chips isn't quite right. I think it's the batter. Talking of which, there's a new fish and chip shop on the corner where that Polish grocer used to be, which is a blessing. That place was neither use nor ornament. The Austrian cake shop's gone as well. Used to quite like their Viennese fancies. Ralph was disappointed. I think he had an eye for that blonde girl on the till. Talk about a Viennese fancy. Well, we won't be going back to Benidorm any time soon. What with the exchange rates? Maureen said a cup of coffee costs nearly £10 now. Then you've got the cost of a visa. Then they throw you into quarantine for a fortnight if you haven't got an impunity certificate. I think we'll have to go to Blackpool next year. That's what most people are doing. So we have to book well ahead. We'd always go to Morecambe or Scarborough. What with global warming, the Zoom be as hot as Benidorm anyway. And we won't need to worry about speaking Spanish. Not that you need to speak Spanish in Spain. Don't get to meet many Spaniards anyway. Apart from the woman who cleaned our flat, and she couldn't understand a word of English in this day and age. We used to see more foreigners here than in Benidorm. Mind you, that's changed now. Now we've got our country back. Ralph said, sensible people are starting to wonder if we've done the right thing. Experts and that. I said, you don't want to listen to them experts. What do they know? Maureen says she voted Leave just to keep the Muslims out. Like a lot of people did. He's always going on about Spain's overrun with them and hardly a week goes by without some atrocity. I said, I'm sure they're not all going out blowing themselves up. I should put Ralph and Maureen in the same room and stand back and watch the fireworks. Maureen says she doesn't know where Ralph gets his fancy ideas from. She said there'll be no room for wishy-washy liberals if the Muslims take over. You know they execute homosexuals in Iran. Mind you, Maureen hasn't got much time for them either. I think she's a bit torn there. I reminded Maureen that tolerance used to be a great British virtue. She said it still is, but we shouldn't go wasting it on the likes of them Muslims. She said if we'd stayed in the EU, we'd have 80,000 Turks coming over looking for work. Oh, that's what they told us. Mind you, they told us getting a good trade deal would be a piece of cake. Look what happened there. She says she's nothing against Europeans. They're mostly like us. Even the French. But the Muslims are nothing like us and they turn to violence at the slightest provocation. She said you can't open a newspaper without reading about Muslims getting up to something deplorable. I said, you can't believe everything you read in the newspapers. Mind you, I think the Daily Express has it about right.
After the controversy surrounding imported meat from hybrid Chinese pig goats, the opposition has criticised the Minister for Food and Beverages, Lord Pickles, for allowing the importation of genetically modified fruit and vegetables, chlorine-washed chicken and mercury-fed beef. Environmental and public health groups say Britain is now being forced to accept products which are unethically produced, damaging to human health and potentially poisonous. The government has rejected claims that new trade deals with the US and China have been bad for British consumers. The president of the CBI commented that if you get into bed with an elephant, you're likely to be squashed.
Maureen asked me if we'd found a new carer. Turns out she saw Heidi pushing me into boots. Now we don't want anyone knowing with an unregistered foreign in the house. So I said, no, she wasn't a carer. You can't get a carer for love nor money. I told her she was Ralph's girlfriend, Heidi. Oh, that took her by surprise. What's come over him? I said, well, he hadn't met the right girl until now. She wanted to know if Heidi was a local girl. Had to think on my feet, so to speak. I said she's from somewhere out east, which is true enough. She said, you mean like Romania? I said, no, King's Lynn. Apparently she thought Heidi looked a bit Slavic. Then Ralph arrived home and Maureen congratulated him on his new girlfriend, which threw him into confusion. Fortunately he soon cottoned on. Maureen said she thought the name Heidi sounded a bit foreign, so I told her it was a very popular name in Norfolk. She said she associated the name Heidi with snow-topped mountains, and there weren't many in Norfolk the last time she looked. I said, well, perhaps they're compensating. Then she mentions Gerald had got a cousin in King's Lynn. Oh, I said, I doubt if they know each other. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. I don't think she believed a word of it anyway. Well, it was a bit far-fetched, the idea that Ralph had actually got himself a girlfriend. Wonder she'll report us to the immigration office. Maureen is a bit of a busybody. Always poking her nose into other people's business. And she'd certainly be happy to see another foreigner deported. Mind you, that's most people round here. So to make sure she doesn't get to meet Heidi. Somehow I don't think she's up to a convincing Norfolk accent. So no more walks in the park and trips to the shops. I told Ralph that perhaps we should think about letting her go. But he wasn't at all keen to see the back of her. After a lot of probing from me, he finally admits he's sweetener, which I knew anyway. Mind you, he didn't think she'd be interested in him. I said, well, there's only one way to find out. He says he's no good at that sort of thing. He'd make some clumsy advance, she'd reject him, and then there'd be a difficult atmosphere. I said, faint heart, ne'er one fair lady? That's always been Ralph's problem, a faint heart. I said, if she isn't worth the effort. He said, she is worth the effort. And that's the problem. The more attracted he is to a woman, the more nervous he gets and the more ham-fisty mess he makes of it. That's life. There's a gamble behind anything worthwhile. Saddest thing is never entering the fray. Marrying his dad was a gamble. What if he turned out to be a wife beater or an adulterer or just plain boring? As it turned out, I could have done a lot worse. And he could do a lot worse than I do. Ralph said I'd changed my tune. Didn't think I had much time for foreigners. I said, but she's different. He said the only difference is I took the trouble to get to know her. But I didn't have much choice though, did I? Anyway, with a little prompting from yours truly, he eventually plucks up the courage to let Ida know he's keen on her. And turns out she feels the same, which is nice. So to cut a long story short, she's not sleeping in the spare room anymore.
In an angry exchange in the House of Lords, the Shadow Minister for Food and Beverages, Lord Prescott, called for the resignation of Lord Pickles after the minister was photographed tucking into a huge fillet steak in an expensive West End restaurant, only hours after announcing that post-Brexit food rationing may have to continue for another 5 years. Lord Pickles responded by remarking that this was a clear case of the pot calling the kettle black, after last month's incident involving Lord Prescott and a Cornish pasty. Lord Prescott replied that Pastygate had been blown up out of all proportion, and his private stockpile of frozen meat products was accumulated before he came out of retirement to help with the post-Brexit crisis. He said it was merely a precautionary measure in difficult times.
Likely as not, Maureen did report us to the Immigration Office, because a few days later we had an unexpected visitor in a black uniform. I told him if he'd come to read the meter, it was under the stairs. He said he wasn't here to read the meter. He was from the Immigration Office and he wanted to ask me a few questions and leave a couple of forms for me to fill in. You should have seen them, nigh on 50 pages each. I said I'd probably leave that to Ralph. Then he starts asking me all these questions about who's living in the spare room. I said Ralph's friend Paul sometimes stays. And when I told him his last name was de Montfort, his ears pricked up on account of it sounding a bit foreign, and he starts filling in one of his forms. I told him his family are foreigners in a way, which pleased him no end. He asked if they're registered. I said, I thought to ask. He wanted to know how long the family had been here. I said, since 1066 or thereabouts. So he gets a bit vexed and he screws up his form. Well, where'd you draw the line? That's what I say. A lot of the people in this street are foreigners. Mr. Helm traces his family back to the markets. He's had that DNA test. Mrs. Rogers has definitely got what I call a Roman nose, so you never know. The Goldbergs at number 42, they only came here to escape the likes of him. He didn't like that. He asked if we've ever knowingly employed a person that wasn't a British subject. I mentioned Moira, so he asked again, have we ever knowingly employed a person that wasn't a British subject or a citizen of the Republic of Scotland? I said, no. But he's obviously done his research. You know all about my stroke and how we'd had 12 full-time carers living in the spare room. I said, not all at the same time. It's only a small room. I said, you just can't get the carers these days. Not since he sent all the foreigners back home. We didn't like that either. Anyway, it turns out that quite a few of our neighbours have been telling tales on us. Apparently there've been sightings of Heidi pushing my chair all over the place. Near the duck pond in Prince's Park, in the High Street, coming out the Sue Ryder shop, and in the fishmongers and Market Lane and so on. I said our neighbours have been busy. He said they've been acting as responsible members of the community. I asked him if he supplied them with binoculars. So, he wants to know who this Heidi is. So I tell him she was Ralph's girlfriend, but she'd gone back to King's Lynn, and he did well to hang on to as long as he did, because he's not very experienced when it comes to matters of heart. But then I expect the neighbours told him all about that. He said precisely what my neighbours have or haven't told him is not a matter for disclosure under the Protection of Privacy Act. I said, what about the protection of my privacy and Ralph's and Heidi's? He said there are serious penalties for harbouring a foreign fugitive. I said, oh my God, has she robbed a bank or something? He said all unregistered foreigners are deemed to be fugitive and will meet the full force of the law. I said, I know all about that. I was in Marks and Spencer's when his armed SWAT team swooped in and arrested that poor Italian girl. They had a pinch of the floor. They dragged her out bleeding. I heard she had learning difficulties, poor thing. He said that was an exceptional case. I said, virtually a daily occurrence round here. He said over 70% of the population of Stoke-on-Trent voted Leave. I told him I was one of them, but I didn't expect all this. All these forms? I thought we were supposed to be getting rid of red tape, and then coming into my home asking all these questions like the bloody Gestapo. I thought there'd be a return to the kind of community where everyone understood each other and got on. What kind of community is this, with all my neighbours telling tales of me? I said it's not the sort of community I want to be part of, so he can pack me off to Europe if he wants. He said I could no more move to Europe than they can come here. I said, one of my ancestors came over with the French Argonauts in the 17th century. Would that help? He said I was being ridiculous. I said, what about you with your network of informers? We fought 2 world wars. I told him if his interrogation was over, I could jolly well leave. Apparently, we haven't heard the last of it.
The situation in Northern Ireland has taken another turn for the worse, with more violent clashes at the heavily fortified border. After the resurgence of the IRA bombing campaign, the leader of Sinn Féin distanced herself from the violence, although she confirmed Sinn Féin's position that there could be no political solution to the border issue until Ulster is fully incorporated into the Irish Republic. The long-feared resumption of the Troubles, coming on top of the increasingly violent skirmishes with the Greek army in Cyprus, the Spanish at Estepona, and the Scots at Berwick-on-Tweed, has stretched British forces to breaking point.
So, looks like we could be facing a raid at any moment. Only last week, a team of armed soldiers in full riot gear raided old Mrs. Tweedle's cottage. They smashed the door down, had a pin to her sideboard, staring down the barrels of a dozen machine guns. They were acting on tip-off from a neighbour that she was harbouring a Pomeranian. Turns out that's a small fluffy dog, There were red faces all round, and Mrs. Tweedle's got a new front door out of it. If they do find Ida, she'll be deported, and we'll be prosecuted for harbouring an illegal alien. Ralph said we don't have many options. I don't know why they can't just get married and be done with it. Ralph said it'd be seen as a marriage of inconvenience. You could say the same for any marriage. So, I suggested we emigrate to Scotland, if they'd have us. Ida took to the idea immediately. She says in Europe, Scotland's seen as a progressive, cosmopolitan, outward-looking country, unlike little England. Ralph was surprised I suggested it, seeing I've lived in this area all my life. He thought I'd miss all my friends and neighbours. I said it turns out that most of my friends and neighbours are informers. Then he goes on about the bagpipes and the awful weather and the midges, and that you can only get vegetables on prescription. Anyway, eventually he sees sense. So all three of us have packed our suitcases and are catching the train to Edinburgh tomorrow. Fee and Heidi can be together. I don't mind spending a few bob on thermal underwear, insect repellent, vitamin C and earplugs. We thought we'd push the boat out and buy a bottle of French wine to celebrate her last night in England. Mind you, Ralph changed his mind when he saw the price. These days, you have to be a millionaire to afford French wine. So we settled for a very reasonably priced Welsh Chardonnay. So, cheers. Not sure about that.